Hello, I'm Death's Arrow, and welcome to episode 3 of What I'm Thinking. In this episode, I'll be focusing on the VK4502P Ausf heavy tank. The VK4502P Ausf, or simply the Ausf, is an often misunderstood vehicle in World of Tanks. While a lot of World of Tanks players consider the Ausf to be a second-rate Tier 9 heavy, which is quite evident by how few of them you see in-game, in the right hands, the Ausf is a tremendously powerful tank. As two of my clanmates like to say, there are no bad tanks, only misunderstood ones. And once you learn how to deal with the idiosyncrasies of the Ausf, it's a real diamond in the rough. From a historical perspective, the VK4502P Ausf was one of Ferdinand Porsche's designs for the Tiger II competition that kicked off in mid-1941. Once again, Porsche and Henschel were ordered by Hitler to develop designs for the next generation tank for the German war machine. Porsche provided two designs for the project. One had a central-mounted turret, which is represented by the Ausf in-game. The second was a rear-mounted turret design. Both designs share the same chassis and hull, along with a number of systems from the failed Porsche Tiger project. Unfortunately, the advanced engine design for the project led to its ultimate failure, as the 10-cylinder engine failed during trials. Only wooden mock-ups were produced. In World of Tanks, the Ausf is a misunderstood beast. There are two reasons for this. The first is the rear-mounted turret. Only 3 tanks and games have this design: the Lich Tractor, the Ausf, and the Maus. The limiting factor of a rear-mounted turret design are poor gun depression and the inability to effectively use peek-a-boom tactics without exposing the entire tank to enemy fire. The second is the poor mobility of the tank. Sluggish would sum up the Ausf perfectly. It turns poorly, it accelerates poorly, and it has a low top speed. It's not quite as bad as a Maus, but you're not going to get anywhere in a hurry in an Ausf. This means that you need to be careful, as a pack of lights or mediums can tear you apart. Also of concern is arty, as the exposed engine deck in the middle of the tank is easily hit. The good news is that the Ausf mounts a 12.8 cm L55 gun. The same weapon is mounted on the E75 and Maus. It's an effective gun to say the least. The Ausf also has good front armor. It's listed at 170 mm, but it's effective enough that few tanks can punch straight through the upper plate. Though, like most German tanks, the lower plate is vulnerable. To enhance the armor, I suggest angling the front of your Ausf about 10 to 15 degrees to try to get shells to bounce. Much like most German vehicles in game, the side and rear armor are thinner, and you generally do not want to present this armor to the enemy if you can avoid it. One other thing to note, the machine gun port on the right side of the front upper hull is a weak spot. This spot isn't as well known as the lower plate, but hits to this spot can cause engine damage and fires. The key to playing the Ausf is to be a bit conservative. You don't want to charge off down a flank, especially alone. That's a recipe for death, as you don't have the mobility to escape bad situations. Try to go where you know you'll have help. Obviously, that's not always possible in pub matches. One thing that I found is that because of the tank's slow speed, you'll generally be behind any other tanks on your flank. This allows you to use your teammates to spot the enemy for you, while you pick them off from a support position. Also, don't be afraid to bully lesser tanks that don't have good mobility. The Ausf has really good front armor. Keep the enemy in front of you and blast away at them. As I mentioned, the rear turret has a major disadvantage in that you can't do a standard peek-a-boom maneuver. The trick in these situations is to take the corner at an angle so that you expose the front armor to the enemy rather than the side armor. For equipment on this tank, I recommend a rammer to speed up reloading, an enhanced gun-laying drive to speed up aiming, and a spall liner to help with the high amount of arty rounds that will be flying your way. This same equipment loadout works for the Maus as well if you decide to sell your Ausf to help finance your Maus, like I did. While I did play the Ausf before the 7.2 patch skill changes, I recommend repair first for the Ausf. This tank takes a lot of module damage, like most German tanks. After that, I recommend taking mobility enhancing skills for the driver, like clutch braking and off-road king. Other than that, I don't have any specific skill recommendations. First replay that we'll be looking at is a solo battle on Karelia from January 7th, 2012. Karelia is a fairly sparse map with no buildings and 3 avenues of attack. The bases are on opposite corners of the map and on top of hills. This map plays similarly from either side, and neither side has a particular advantage over the other. Typically, there are 2 main avenues of advance on this map: the southern valley and the northern flank. The southern valley is usually where the high-tier heavies clash. This area has protection from artillery strikes and a good amount of hard cover. Often, you will find a contingent of mediums or fast heavies push the hill at G7, which offers a flanking to the southern valley and the potential to snipe along the middle of the map and the northern flank. The northern flank sees a variety of tanks and has some good hard cover to play peekaboo with. Typically, the middle is no man's land outside of Suez Scouts due to the long firing lanes with little cover. Occasionally you will see tanks try to sneak along the cliffs below the hill at G7. The terrain here is soft and it's definitely slow going for most tanks. Reviewing tank composition for this battle shows the following. My tank is top tier. Some would consider 3 E75s superior to 2 IS4s and an Ausf, but as far as I'm concerned it's a wash. We have more tier 8s, although 2 of them are KV5s. The enemy has 2 of their 3 Type 59s in a platoon. There's only 1 arty per team, and the M41 is a decent arty piece. There are 2 players in this battle whom I recognize. One is Fang GT, although I didn't know him at the time of this battle, so it's somewhat irrelevant to this conversation. The other player I recognize is Garbad, although to be honest, I didn't notice him when I played this battle, and that's because he's in a BDR and not platoon like he typically is. By his own account, he's God's gift to tanks. In reality, his tanks have just as many hit points as any other, and I've destroyed him on more than one occasion. As the map loads up, I'm starting from base 2 at the northeast corner of the map, and decide to go valley. In this tank, I prefer the route with more arty cover, as well as limited exposure to crossfire, so I can keep my front armor at the enemy. As I drive into the valley, I notice on the minimap that the northern flank and middle of the map aren't well covered. 9 of the 15 tanks on the team are going to the valley. Not the best spread, generally speaking. I'll keep a close eye on the minimap in case the enemy is able to overwhelm those lightly defended areas. Our mediums have pushed the hill at G6 as an AMX-12 spots 2 of the enemy Type 59s. I move up to get shots on the 59s and get an ammo rack kill on my first shot. 59s are very vulnerable to ammo rack explosions. If you can get a side or rear turret shot on a 59, take it every time. The third 59 shows up along with a slugger and an IS. Nothing too scary so far. Then, a 3001P and finally one of the E75s pops up. Please note the angle of my armor as I bounce a shot from the E75 and take a track hit from the 3001P. As I mentioned in the intro, armor angling is key to survival in German tanks. I maneuver up to one of the outcrops and use it as hard cover as I reload between taking shots at the enemy in J7. Anytime you can hide your tank while reloading, there's less chance of taking damage when you can't return fire. I'm trying to get shots at the E75, but end up settling for the 3001P. A check of the minimap shows the northern flank is in trouble, and 2 enemy heavies are pushing below the cliffs. As the valley is well covered, I turn around and head back to base to defend. As I come around the bend out of the valley, I spot Garbad's BDR trying to sneak up the hill to our base. I slow down, line him up, and knock him down. The last tank on the northern flank is gone, and I'm unlikely to catch the enemy as they begin to roll up the A-line, so I begin to climb the hill. As I'm climbing the hill, another enemy is spotted. It's another E75. I get behind the rocks before he can shoot me in the back. I spot an IS-3 as I continue up the hill. Looks like I chose the right time to turn back. I crest the hill and put a round into the IS-3. After I fire, I back up to the rocks to protect my rear from the E75 that I know is behind me. then knocked down the IS-3 as an enemy IS crests the hill. Please note the two friendlies have almost made it back to assist me. I let the friendlies take on the IS as it's back down the hill some, and I round the rocks to take on the E-75. As I come around, the 3001P lights up and I knock him down. I'm now facing an E-75 one-on-one, and he draws first blood, damaging me for almost 475 points of damage. Rather than risk bouncing on his lower plate due to the vertical angle I'm at, I go after his commander's hatch. At this close range, it's not a hard shot to make, and it's a guaranteed pen shot. Our reloads are going to be very similar, so I know I can aim carefully to get my hit and then rotate after my shot to try and get bounces. A KV with a 152mm derp gun shows up to interrupt our dance. The derp KV is a dangerous tank in any battle, and he took off a good chunk of health. As he has a long reload, I keep my focus on the E-75 and hit his commander's hatch again. The E-75 tracks me, but with 100% repair, the track is back up quickly, and the E-75 can't take advantage of the situation. As you can see, the IS-4 that was helping defend base has come around and now has flank shots at both enemy tanks. As I take aim on the E-75, the IS-4 knocks him out. Now that the E-75 is dead, that derp KV is dead meat. The IS-4 and I now advance up the middle. While we were busy defending base, the Valley team got crushed by the remaining E-75s. As the last tank in that area gets finished off, it's now just myself and an IS-4 versus two E-75s and their arty. One of the E-75s is at low health. We keep advancing, but I decide to split up and try to get crossfire on the enemy. This turns out to be a good plan, as the second E-75 is spotted at half health. We're definitely in better shape than I first thought. We haven't seen the enemy arty up to this point. Usually arty sits on the hill in the K1 area, but that's not always the case. We climb the hill to push the enemy base. As we crest the hill and get onto the enemy cap, arty is nowhere in sight. We're both slow, so it doesn't make any sense to chase after the arty. Turns out that the enemy arty was going for a ninja cap. He's way too late for that, and we finish the cap for the win. Looking at the victory screen, I racked up 4 kills and earned just over 1,800 experience points, which is nothing to sneeze at. I landed 15 of my 17 shots and killed Garbad again, plus I earned a steel wall. This battle is another example of the need to keep an eye on the minimap. Just because one flank is succeeding, it doesn't mean that on a big picture scale that the battle is going well. In this case, the valley push went well, but that's because almost 2/3 of the team was there. The remaining tanks in the middle and northern flank were quickly overwhelmed and dispatched. By paying attention to the minimap, I knew not to advance too far into the valley, so that when I made the decision to turn back to base, that I would be able to make it back in time to stop the enemy from capping. Personally, I prefer to stop the enemy before they get to cap than to try to stop them on cap. I likely got a little lucky as I climbed the hill back to base, as the E75 had shots on my rear. There are times, though, that you don't have any options when it comes to running back for defense. Once the IS-4 and I began our push across the middle, my decision to break off and move into a flanking position in the swamp helped us to mop up the remaining enemy forces. The second replay that we'll be looking at is a platoon battle on cliffs from February 8th, 2012. In this battle, I am platooned with Jovial Madness in his E75 and Titus Bramble in his T-34. This is pre-7.2, so the T-34 is still a Tier 9 heavy tank. The map for this battle is cliff. This map has the bases at the north and south ends, with a valley on the western flank connecting the two. The eastern portion of the map is elevated, with two large jutting hills providing cover from enemy fire. An overlooking position near the center of the map allows tanks to fire into the valley from above. Neither side of the map has a particular advantage over the other. Typically, a small contingent of heavies or TDs protects the western valley. There's plenty of cover in this area from either side. Mediums will usually push to the F3, F4 area above the valley, and there's generally a brawl early on for this area, as it gives you shots into the valley if the enemy team pushes, as well as sniping and spotting opportunities all over the map. A group of heavies usually pushes the eastern route around the lighthouse, and there's typically a battle in the E8 area. The middle is typically a mixed bag, as it's open to arty fire, although there is some decent cover around E6. Reviewing tank composition for this battle shows the following. It's a Tier 10 fight with 3 Tier 10s per side. Our Tier 10s are platooned in an AOD-A, which is an encouraging sign. The enemy has better Tier 9s. We have better Tier 8s. Both teams have 2 arty pieces that are big threats. Our team has better low-end tanks, although they don't figure to impact on this battle much. The enemy team has a platoon of AODW players, although I don't know any of their names. I don't recognize anyone else in this battle. We're starting from the southern base and make a decision to head east towards the lighthouse. On this map, you need to keep an eye on the minimap early to make sure that a few tanks cover the valley, and if no one else does, you need to be ready to take up those positions. This happens more often than you think.
Let's go.
The valley ends up being lightly defended as the Mouse oddly decides to climb the hill. An enemy IS-4 is spotted at E2. Our Lorraine and T-20 are headed to the cliff and will soon be engaged by the enemy's 50B, 50-120, and E-50. An enemy IS-7 is spotted at D6. He's likely headed towards the lighthouse road. Our mediums at the cliff are quickly destroyed, and the majority of the team is pushing towards the lighthouse, and the enemy team has control of the middle of the map. Rather than lemming along with the rest of the team, I turn towards the middle as I spot an enemy IS-7. The enemy, unchecked, has moved up to push the valley and are threatening at F2. The rest of my platoon has turned to back me up as I move to engage the enemy forces in the middle of the map. As I move up, I spot an enemy Type 59 and an E-50. I begin to put fire on them.
Looks like that one went right through.
The 50B is then spotted at F3, and he quickly becomes the primary target.
We didn't even scratch them. Ricochet.
The 50B retreats after getting hammered. The enemy IS-7 is isolated in the nook to our right. Jovial begins the charge. Titus and I aren't far behind.
Right through their armor.
3-on-1, we make quick work of the IS-7, and Titus gets the kill shot. Arty makes its presence known. The spot we're at isn't Arty safe. It's clear that the GW Tiger has had a bead on us for a while, as he waited for the IS-7 to die before dropping around on me. This is typical Arty behavior to avoid hitting friendlies that are engaged in close quarters combat. A dead gunner and a blown engine will require the use of my repair kit and medical kit. Otherwise, I'll be very limited the rest of the way. The enemy is now capping our base. The three of us turn around and head back towards base to defend. I reach an overlook position and start firing on the cappers. We have the advantage here, superior number and firepower.
Enemy armor is destroyed.
As the MAUs and T-30 close on the final wounded defender, I see on the minimap that there's an engagement occurring at E8. I spin around to see what's happening, as our IS-7 is reduced to one-shottable status by an enemy IS-7. This will likely end badly for our IS-7, so I move to assist. As I reach the fight, our IS-7 has held his own and worked the enemy IS-7 down.
Looks like that went
I join the engagement, get a hit on the IS-7, and then ram him to death. No point in waiting for my reload, as a full-speed ram is instant death in this case.
Enemy vehicle destroyed.
The battle is just about over as I keep pushing towards the enemy base. Looking at the victory screen, our platoon's impact is clear. We got 10 kills, and the AOD A platoon got the remaining 5. 1400 experience without the triple is decent. Good platoons tend to share the wealth rather than have one member reap all the benefits. Overall, we made a good decision to go towards the lighthouse early on and then modify our plan as things evolve. We ended up having to cover the middle, as most of the team went in the same direction towards the lighthouse in typical pub lemming fashion. After ganging up and taking out the IS-7, our next direction was clear, back to base to defend Cap. With overwhelming firepower, the attackers are quickly dealt with. While I likely could have left the IS-7 engagement at E7 alone without costing us the win, there's nothing wrong with helping a pub teammate out. When enemies have low health, ramming is a good option to ensure that you'll finish them off. Just be careful if you have low health yourself, or you could be killed in the process. Also, be aware of how heavy your opponent is. Ramming a low is usually a bad plan, as the tank weighs over 90 tons. Thank you for watching this episode of What I'm Thinking. Stay tuned for another episode soon. In the next episode, I'll be looking at the best scout in the game, the T-50-2.